5 years.
You fellas, you want to do a brief introduction? I guess I should say my name's Chad Kelley. It's great, and I'm grateful to be your host today. Thanks for your time. You guys want to do some quick introductions before we get into the details?
Sounds excellent.
Who wants to start? Maybe Dweeb, you want to start?
Sure. So my name is Baud. I work at SMB and actually startups for the last 5 years. I've been working there. For the last 4 years, I've been security architect, which turned out to be actually a principal security architect. And now I own all aspects of security at that company and doing some other stuff in the meantime and supporting some other smaller startups because definition of SMB and startup differs between countries, definitely. But at this point, I think I feel kind of competent to speak of SMB security because for the past 5 years, I was seriously connected to $100 million startup in US. And based on Wikipedia definition of SMB, it's still a startup. So I guess I'm still working in a startup.
We'll talk about that. We'll get into how we define. That's a great way to probably kick off our conversations. How do we define that small, mid-sized business? And they really technically are kind of startup when you think about it like that. Russell, you're in DC. You want to do a quick intro?
Sure thing. Thank you. My name is Russell Mosley. I'm an IT infrastructure and security director at a small business in the DC area. By small business, we have less than 50 employees. I've been here for 17 years. Started here right after college. Kind of career grew with the company, and today I manage a small team. I'm responsible for IT operations and information security for the organization, which includes maintaining an ATO, which is an authorization to operate a federal government IT system, meaning that we have to stay in compliance with FISMA regulations. That is the NIST Special Publication 853 Rev 4 at the FIPS moderate level, FIPS 199 moderate, as well as annual SOC audits. I have bachelor's and master's degrees, CISSP, and several vendor certs, and experience administering Windows, Linux, VMware, Cisco, and I installed and managed all of our first round of security controls, firewalls, IDS, IPS, web proxy, as well as authoring or co-authoring most of our policies here. Today I have one other person who works full-time at InfoSec and a junior analyst career changer that we're trying to build up into an InfoSec admin.
Cool, man. Glad you're here with us today. Rob, can you hear us all right?
Yeah, yes, I can. There was a little bit of lag for me, but sounds all good now, actually.
Cool. Good morning. You want to tell us what it's like in your part of the world there in Essex?
For sure. I just got to do a quick disclaimer, if that's all right. So I'll just quickly go. My opinions are my own and not representative of my employees or our employers or my clients, if that's all right.
Sure.
So I'll give a little bit of background. I've worked in the InfoSec space for about 15 years now, and primarily around healthcare and nonprofit clients. I have transitioned through a few different organizations. I'm actually currently with another financial institution, but I also maintain a specific set of nonprofit clients that I take care of on a regular basis. And they truly define the small in the small to medium business area. I've worked primarily in threat risk assessment, security awareness, operational security, worked with very many different types of vendors, and even trying to foray into the web pen testing aspect of things, although I am nowhere near as good as anybody else that I'm reading about on the peer list area. I've also spent a majority of my career consulting as well, ensuring that clients are doing their best due diligence because Canada has a specific set of regulations around privacy. So doing my best to help out and making sure we perform due diligence. Beyond that, just keeping anybody that I talk to aware of the goings on in the security world, and hopefully that we can later on in our next round of panels is get more InfoSec people involved, especially those coming up through the system. And I'm glad to hear that, Russell, you got some junior with you that is really excited to be part of the InfoSec space.
Yeah, for sure. That's fantastic. Thanks for that, man. Matt, are you listening? I'm not sure where you're based.
Matt Kelley. I'm the IT manager for a travel gaming facility north of Chicago. And as a travel gaming facility, we have all kinds of compliance areas that we need to comply with, specific to gaming, but also on the government aspect as well.
Awesome. Were you one of these people that knew exactly what you wanted to be when you were like 8 years old and planned your arc from the beginning, or is this something it was part of a much more organic sort of arc?
I actually kind of backed into the whole thing. I've been in tech, starting on the layer 1 side for 20 years.
Okay.
And I kind of worked my way up into more technical stuff, and then once I had a chance to dive a little bit deeper into information security, it's been an interesting ride so far, and I've really been enjoying it.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks, Klaus, for introducing yourself. And Luxembourg Community Manager for PeerList.
All right. Most of you, since this is a PeerList community PeerTalk, most of you probably know who I am, but may not know my background. Currently, as you probably know, I'm a community manager with PeerList, which means getting to interact with a huge community, trying to moderate, trying to encourage content, and so on. Previously to my job at PeerList, I was working for 5 years at a small bank in Luxembourg in the less than 50 employees space. Luxembourg, as you might know, is a financial capital in Europe, similar to London and Frankfurt, where we have a large number of banks in a small amount of space. And we have extensive regulation from the authorities on these banks, which means that I, working as an IT, head of IT and head of security, was responsible both for creating policies, compliance with all the extensive compliance regimes that we had, and managing the day-to-day IT and security operations, including somewhat hands-on, but I had a team that was way better than me at the hands-on parts of it. So before that, I also worked in several different jobs, also SMBs. So I've been in SMB since my career started somewhere around 2001, and that's my introduction. Well, I also have a CISSP, like many do, but I don't put much value in that.
Awesome, thanks for that. I'm hopefully a good fit to moderate this panel, and I'm grateful for everybody's time. And if it's cool, we'll kick this off and talk a little bit about what defines an SMB. What defines a small or mid-market business? Is it size? And you guys all have a very different perspective. Each opinion is going to be unique. And how do you guys define that? Do you define that by the size of the company, how many employees, how many FTEs, how many full-time, dedicated InfoSec people they have? Maybe we could talk a little bit about that. And I don't know who wants to kick this off.
Oh, I can go. I wrote my definition on PeerList recently after I gave my talk at B-Sides Luxembourg on SMB security just 2 months ago. And my definition basically is very close to the EU ENISA definition, which is less than 500 employees. To me, it's less than 500 employees with 0 to maximum 1 person doing security.
That's about it, and that's hard to imagine. Just a pure play IT, of how many folks does it take to support 500 people? The ratio depends who you ask. Sometimes it's 50 to 1. Some places are less conservative. They're like 100 to 1. You have 5 people essentially supporting 500 people, and that's just break fix type stuff. So when you're talking about security, there's a lot more at stake, you might say. Maybe some of the others, Matt and Rob and Russell, you guys have some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think as we move forward too, I think it's the ratio of InfoSec to IT people as well. The IT regular IT, generalist IT should have some basic security knowledge, but that specialized IT security should be able to supplement any of the regular generalist IT people out there as well.
This is Russell. I also think that when you're talking about security at SMB, you also need to break the category down a bit, even beyond Klaus's definition, of less than 500 with a maximum of one person sort of dedicated to security. Because, there's a variety of type of SMB, and you can have a small IT shop, with 40 people, much like the business where I work, with a really secure maturity program. And you can also have, businesses that have nothing to do with IT, a plant with a few hundred people working, or warehouses or whatever, and they have a lot more people there without, as much focus on IT and as much other knowledge around operations that, also needs to be done correctly before you can really focus on security. And then you also have like mom and pop shops or restaurants and coffee houses. Those are kind of different. So when you talk about security at SMB, I think it's like security at SMB that are completely not IT focused and, don't really do anything IT at all, versus security at small businesses that have some IT experience. They're going to, have very different resources on hand to grow from.
I kind of joke, but one of those aspects too is that mom and pop shop that started because they got tired of running into IT security and just wanted to bake muffins all day.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Right. Of course, Russell, you're right. It's never two-dimensional. There's also the extra dimension of a startup such as where David is working may be using purely cloud services, like basically Peerless is, which is very different from a bank in Luxembourg where I work, where we had a very traditional self-owned infrastructure. So we have a lot of varied companies and types of infrastructure that fall into the SMB definition.
Certainly, I agree 100%. The business where I work, we're more of that classic model where we don't use many cloud services yet. We intentionally don't, because we still feel like we have the resources on hand to do most of what we need, and we would rather have that data under our management than out in the cloud. But that's changing. Many businesses can't operate a lot of the components that you need for IT on their own as effectively, efficiently, and securely as well as you can going to cloud services today. And I think with a startup, you'd be crazy to try to build a lot of your own infrastructure with the maturity of a lot of the cloud services that are out there today.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. And I kind of go into one of my clients that are a small organization of 5 people. They have aging infrastructure, but they host a lot of personal information, so they're very wary on putting it into the cloud, but their infrastructure eventually is going to get to a point where they have no choice because they can't support it.
What factors and also the cultures that drive those decisions? And is it there's a lot?
I think it's yeah, and I think that's a question that obviously leads to the next few statements too. Is regulations have a big part, and I know we're going to get to it eventually. But that local legislation, especially when it comes to Canada, takes privacy very seriously. And I think GDPR, if I said that correctly, also is going to take a big effect on all these organizations, Dorian. So that is a very big initial point to ensure everybody's doing their due diligence.
It's important. It also is a factor in obtaining that buy-in from leadership. When we're talking about budgets and things for security for the SMB. Maybe you guys have some thoughts on that. Is that, Klaus, do you have some thoughts on that as well?
Well, yeah, since I worked in a bank, for us it was really hard. We're a small bank. The bank is still there. And the main driver for budgets was compliance. And compliance is always spoken of evilly in the InfoSec community, right? But for me, we had so many compliance requirements, so we needed compliance to get budgets. It was almost that simple.
I agree. Compliance can be an excellent tool for businesses that otherwise wouldn't want to focus on security. I mean, look at the state of security around credit cards before the PCI industry standard came out. I mean, you could certainly point out the number of breaches is, it's still growing, but there's a lot more security in place now than before the PCI standard. Companies, with what they did with regards to taking credit cards and, not even having HTTPS in place before it was really a requirement of the PCI standard. So I think compliance does have its place and will force management to take action when they otherwise wouldn't.
Right. So for example,
a double-edged. Yeah, please come.
May I? Yeah, awesome. So for example, at the company I work at, we had 80% of our infrastructure built in-house. So we had our own data centers. We had all this stuff built by ourselves. But we came to the point where we just wanted to move much faster, to build much bigger things and build them faster without wasting too much resources, IT ops in general, type of resources to build infrastructure, but we had plenty of software engineers capable of creating great products. So we just decided, okay, it's not easy to hire IT ops people, good IT ops people to scale to the point we want to scale. So we decided, okay, we are going to go to the cloud. And I've seen a lot of companies doing exactly the same. They don't really consider security as their first thing to... security isn't the first thing they think of while going to the cloud. I would say that over 90% of startups in Silicon Valley mostly consider how fast and how agile they are going to be able to go with their development lifecycle as opposed to thinking about security. I would say most of companies that go to cloud don't give it a second thought how is the security in cloud. They hear good things about security in cloud, which is fine, but obviously there are inherent flaws with hosting data in cloud and going to cloud, because those companies, most of the companies that go in cloud without thinking about the dangers of going into cloud, have no clue what are the risks associated with going to cloud. They care only about moving fast and deploying services there.
Yeah, I think I agree entirely with that statement. I was just going to make 2 points in regards to all the compliance aspects. Is that hopefully as SMB grows, that they realize that compliance is not an end game. It's a point. It's better than no security, but it's not the final. So hopefully SMEs, we get that intelligence to keep moving forward. That, and also there's a great point about cloud security is that these SMBs cannot assume that cloud is secure. They need to still do their due diligence, especially when we start moving into that cloud-to-cloud application type transfers as well.
Also on compliance, we said it's good for driving budgets, but Chad, you presented the question of how do you present all this to your management? And getting budgets outside of compliance requires time where you build up relationship to your executives, trust. And then we come to the people skills. That's when you need to stop being the nerd and start being the people person, the business person, the person who talks business risk. And that's when you start moving beyond compliance, to me.
I like the way that you framed that, Klaus, because it really is a delicate dance. Maybe you guys can talk about the kinds of things in the specific cultures you're working at as of SMB that are successful in building these business cases. When we introduce those concepts, when things aren't awesome, right? It's just like someone introduces you to a specific food when you're sick and you're not feeling awesome. Every time you re-experience that, there's that overarching kind of sensation of that unpleasantness, right? Every time you revisit that food, that topic, right? But when someone introduces it to you in the sunshine, you're always going to have this positive, this sense of confidence in it, right? What are some of the things that you guys are doing to introduce security to your leadership in the sunshine?
I think it's all about presenting it as a risk-based assessment. What is the business required to operate, and if something were to happen on the security side, how badly will you be impacted, and are you able to operate from a business operations standpoint if something like that were to happen?
It's an important point, because that's the business case right there, right? Anybody else?
My experience, that's a very tough one. If you have joined a company that haven't ever been breached, so they don't really realize the cost of getting breached and investing in security, that's hard to convince them to do something. If you're joining an organization that have no one on board that was doing ever security work, knows the security aspects, and just purely wants to invest in security, that's going to be tough. So this social and engineering part is two-edged sword, because I faced a lot of situations in a couple of companies that had it all good for many years. Some companies went with 10 years of business exposure without investing a single cent in security. And they were fine. And it was very hard to convince them, hey, you need to invest in security because of this, and that. And because they haven't really seen an indicator that something may go wrong if they don't invest. Every company seems to be thinking that security doesn't affect them, breaches don't affect them, until they actually get punched in the face, and then they realize, okay, so we should have invested in this because it would be more cost efficient to invest in security as opposed to getting hacked right now. So using the situation in rainy days when some other company gets hacked, when there is some shock on the stock market, when we see, okay, stocks of this company went down because they were hacked, they were breached, there was some privacy violation in company, it's a good way to convince execs that they should care from a business perspective. Because in some companies, where you can use all the types of social dance and use your social skills, it's just not going to happen unless they see a real proof that they need to invest in security, because other companies went there, worked fine, and then just went down because of one security incident or one breach.
It's funny you should say that, because it's so true. It's so true that, for example, lawmakers, every time there's a big crisis, they use that to push something through that they have wanted for a long time. And in security, as security managers, we try to do the same. We use things like WannaCry and NotPetya, the resurgence of the worms, to try to get companies that may never have been breached to start improving a little bit. And that may be us using FUD, but we may be forced to do that because we may be unable to get anywhere without that.
Right. So I wouldn't really name it a FUD, because there are just facts. We are not spreading redundant FUD. We are just saying how it is. And there are things you can enforce in a good manner. Like, it doesn't take a hack to convince your execs to do something. For example, if you are a software house, you can convince your executives that, hey, providing this feature will get us in front of many customers, allowing to customize two-factor authentication, adding very granular audit policy, login history, all this stuff. If you are targeting a certain type of businesses and you know that they have requirements in terms of some security features, you can get a budget on security by convincing them that we could do this to gain some more exposure, customers, or just for good PR to show off our security acumen and show the world that we actually care. So just focusing on the marketing side, I would say.
I think that's correct too, because as you get into more compliance type aspects of things, when you can show that you've done, your SOC type 2s if you host a data center, or you provide the certificates or security, you get that ability to grab that client base, because when they're doing their requests for their RFPs, they're going to ask for those kind of things, and being ahead of the game shows your more willingness to commit to security than other companies. And also, one of those things that I noticed too is that all it takes is one ransomware infection to push ahead that security awareness budget.
Absolutely. In terms of compliances and using compliances to drive the security budget, that's good, because actually in the company I work at, we had a couple of situations when a few major financial clients, prospects, came to us and said, hey, we would love to use your products. We love your products. It's good. It's great. It's better than competition. But we are not going to go with you and push our data to your cloud if you don't have SOC 2 compliance, HIPAA compliance, and ISO 27001. So this is definitely a driver for improving security, which we as a technical folks can use those budgets and customer requests to actually improve security, because compliances come into flavors. One type is, okay, let's get compliance to get compliance done, and on the other part, there are security professionals who really care about security, and they use compliances as a butt for executives and all the IT staff to say, hey, we shouldn't be doing it because we need to be compliant. We have an opportunity to improve this because we are under certification process.
Agreed, and that's where that comes down to. Like, you don't want to lose $1 million worth of client for $100,000 worth of control.
That's a great example, Rob. You guys are all, kind of coming to the same conclusion. It sounds like that there is a balance. There's a balance between making this a positive thing as it's adding value to the business, but there also has to be that element of, hey, there is a little bit of fear that when this risk is unaddressed, the consequences, and making sure that everyone's building their fluency in that. How much fluency is required by leadership? I mean, do you feel like you're building fluency in everyone, that there really isn't a lot of literacy? Is that the biggest challenge to get started? Is that how you open the conversation at all? Or how are you tackling breaking the ice at the outset? Is it compliance that kind of mental for that as well?
I think compliance can be a driver to start that conversation. But from my own path, information security can be really intimidating for somebody not versed in it, or even portions of it to really get into and understand. There's a lot of old boys club, so to speak, that makes it difficult for people, not familiar with a lot of the different facets to get in there. But compliance really forces people to take a look and make that beginning.
Are you others seeing the same thing in the sectors and cultures you're working in?
I will say that one of the things that I notice is, obviously, depending on the size, a lot of leadership could care less from an information security standpoint because they don't understand it and they trust individuals to be their opinion. But I think as you get larger, you do want a good understanding, because it does help push, and pardon the term, an agenda from the top down, because if you don't have buy-in from the top, it makes it useless to try and even establish anything. And yeah, it is important, compliance, in very many aspects, to hopefully give them just enough understanding that they realize how important it is, and they can push from the top down and show and encourage staff from the top to the bottom about how important it is.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. In my experience, if you can get executive buy-in on security initiatives, that's your best scenario. You want them to understand their roles and responsibilities with regards to security, from the highest levels. And they shouldn't be doing things like asking for exceptions to the controls that you put in place. Like, I shouldn't have to do 2FA, set it for everybody else but not me. That's not the situation you want to be in. They should be helping set the example. And it's amazing when you get management buy-in on things, in my experience, then the people who are really pushing back are like, the other technologists. In my case, a lot of times it's members of the software development team are the people that we have to convince more than anyone else why we should be, adding some new layer or some new control to an application. And we do our best to try to explain to them the reasons why and, what the vulnerability is if we don't add this to our system. But if you have management buy-in, that makes everything so much easier. They'll come in and handle it for you.
I absolutely agree with you, Ron. I would even go more to the edge and said that if you don't have a buy-in from management and executives, there are very little chances of achieving anything. Because when it comes to the software development, developers and software engineers are being pushed by their managers and execs to deliver code quickly. No one cares about security. So if you approach developers and tell them, hey, you must do something, they're going to respond, hey, we have our own deadlines. So we would love to do this because we value you, we value the security in our product, we value AppSec, but our managers pressures us to do something else. So if you don't have a buy-in, you will have a very hard time to do anything. And I'm not even speaking about budget and stuff like this. Money aside, I'm speaking about situations where authority is just required, because you will face just troubled people, problematic people with whom you need to use an authority to force something because they want, like enabling two-factor authentication, disk encryption, and whatnot. If you don't have management, software engineering management on your team, on your side, there is no chance you can force security fixes and improvements in applications, because software engineers have no time for this. So if management doesn't allocate the spare time for security things, security fixes, it's not going to happen. If executives don't care about security, you as an employee can do very little to secure the company. All you have in your disposal is your salary. That's all your budget. That's all your budget. And sure, if you're a great technical person and great human being who has a lot of social skills, you can talk to people, you can instill the basic security mindset in them, but on the scale of a whole business, it doesn't really matter that much. So I would say if you are in a business for a couple of months and you don't see management buying into your solutions and ideas, why not search another company that would really care about you and doing security work? I've seen too many people getting burned out in our industry, which is tragic to see. Some people take their lives away. Some people lose a lot of health by working in the companies that don't appreciate their work in toxic environments. I would just emphasize on this part as well.
Well, that might lead us nicely into a discussion about legislation that could either help or harm, because compliance is essentially legislation, right? So is additional legislation help to drive some of this change, and what are some of the risks to that? I mean, Klaus had a really great question that he posted when we were putting this panel together, before we met today, that how can that help or harm the SMB, even if it's just a little bit of a framework to get people, like some of the critical lists that NIST has and things, or is it better not to touch SMB security at all with any legislation? Maybe you guys could share some of your thoughts on that.
From my own perspective, I think, and Klaus and I discussed this in the Peerless community, setting up the panel. I think that the only way that SMBs get affected by legislation is through supply chain, because throwing a piece of legislation or regulation at them when they don't have the resources to do basic steps, period, when there's no financial penalty or incentive to do so, it just doesn't make any sense. It's just one more thing that they allegedly need to do, whether it's in their best interest or not, which is where we're at right now. If supply chain, such as the GSA program for federal government purchasing, where a lot of small businesses participate in and receive money for their goods and services, okay, that might entice them to do certain things that they can attest to. But if they don't participate, if it's just a small 20-person employee diner that has an access point and retains their employee and their credit card records on a personal computer that may or may not be updated regularly, another piece of legislation doesn't really impact that, I don't think.
Yeah, I think the hard part, and this is kind of one of those where your great point, is the participation aspect of things. When you get into those legislations and compliance aspects, there's got to be a cutoff point, because when you're dealing with a mom and pop shop, obviously there should be some kind of penalty. If you're taking credit card data and sending it over the air in clear text, yeah, there's got to be some penalties involved. But I think from a certain standpoint, when you get those SMBs to take information security seriously, there's got to be that cutoff point, because they still have a right to do business. Now, one of the things I'm going to kind of like segue for a second into how the enterprise, as you guys mentioned before, about how the enterprise affects legislation. And I'll go back to that Yahoo breach a while back. And that was the best thing that could have ever happened, pardon for everybody that got exploited for Yahoo, but to lose $1 billion in valuation for that breach, I think it woke everybody up and made them realize that there are actual non-compliance consequences when it comes to these kind of scenarios as well.
That's a good point. I also look for the bright side in both legislations, compliances, and breaches, because all of those things that can be used for malice reasons, they can be used for increasing the social awareness, the public awareness in terms of security, then can be used to enforce some things within the company. And at the end of the day, we are all customers and consumers. So I get it that all of us who work at SMBs and corporations as security professionals, we don't like compliances because we see the burden that they come with. But for looking from the third party side, from customer perspective, we should love legislation and compliances because they at least enforce the baseline for what companies should do. Because I believe all of us had it enough when it comes to data breaches and personal data leakages, privacy violations, and all those things. So I really like this because I would love to live in a world where I can be sure that when I pass some personal data to application, web shop, whatever it is, commercial application, it's going to be saved there. I don't need to worry about my address, home address leaking, phone number leaking, email address leaking, or my chats with my friends or who not. So I believe this is great. Legislations and compliance are a great tool. GDPR is going to be great. It's going to emphasize the importance of storing, actually it is, emphasizing the importance of storing personal data securely. So this is great. And when it comes to businesses, I'm a huge believer that if a business cannot sustain with keeping security at basic level, they shouldn't be in the business at all. I know it's very drastic thing to say, but if you are going to change something, we should keep pushing the ball into the direction where companies either include security into their business model or they just go out of business.
David, you should see the compliance costs of being a bank in Luxembourg. It's almost impossible today, if you do not have massive funding and investors willing to take losses for years, to start a financial services company in Luxembourg. The compliance costs, not only in security, but in other places such as MiFID, the compliance costs are just horrible. They are really, really scaring people off. The amount of banks in Luxembourg over the last 5 years has decreased from 250 to 150 because it's just not worth being a bank in Luxembourg anymore. The compliance alone is so expensive. And then if we need to start doing real security on top of that, maybe prescribed by a law, then it gets really, really, really expensive to actually run a business. So any kind of law that we pass is going to make people who start companies start fewer companies, and it's going to make some of the companies in business go out of business.
Right, but I get it that most companies are not affected by what you said. I mean, financial industry, okay, that's something to consider indeed. But when it comes to 90% of companies out there, they don't take such high costs of creating basic security baseline and all the legislation that we have nowadays. So sure, I'm all for the free market, and I believe that we should legislate too much stuff because we want companies to be created and new competition to be created, because monopolies is bad for us as a customers. We don't want only the rich big banks exist and smaller not. But on the flip side, we need to have a balance of this, because while it's bad, it's also ensuring that some baseline is in place, which gives you a sense of security that, okay, I can actually use this bank for anything, because we don't really want medical healthcare services and bank financial services without any insurance that they're safe, because I want my money, my health, and all this type of stuff to be safe. So certainly there are downsides, but for most companies, I would say it's most of the legislation that we face nowadays are good.
I think something that might work would be voluntary laws, voluntary compliance, voluntary self-assessment, like the UK Cyber Essentials. Imagine if you were a mom and pop web shop that started out with just mom and pop, but you're now 12 people shipping fashion clothes to all of Europe, for example. Imagine if you got a 1% tax, what's it called when you don't have to pay? It's called I can't remember the word in English. But you pay 1% less tax if you voluntarily do the cyber essentials. I think that might work.
That's a good idea. That might work. But seeing how many companies still cheat on certifications and official compliances, I'm not sure that this is a reliable way of doing things. I mean, sure, why not give it a shot, right? So this is an alternative, but I don't think it would cover lots of malicious companies because again, most of companies doing security is not something they want to do because it costs them stuff and doesn't provide them direct value. It doesn't have a direct ROI. It has ROI only for their customers. So I'm not sure if it will work. I mean, maybe that's a good thing. I believe it all boils down to the balance. We shouldn't just put all the legislation on all types of companies because we see very small startups that just trying to do something great for the world. I'm always enabling them. I'm always supporting them. So I just don't like that legislations are fine, let's put it this way, but I don't like the way we apply them to all the companies without any context, without giving a second thought if they need it and if they can afford it actually.
Matt, Rob, and Chad and Russell, what do you think about software liability? Would it make SMB security better if all the devices and the software we purchase off the shelf from various websites and service providers and security providers, if that came with a liability for the company selling it to us?
I'm going to make one small point in regards to that, just because software is such a big thing, but I think just to point to the IoT framework, there's so many devices that are coming out today that become unsupported so quickly because the margins are so small that it would really be tough to penalize long-term for any startup that is get in and get out type thing.
Well, I think if the incentive are right, it's a great question, Klaus. I mean, when you talked about cyber essentials in the UK, right, the incentives are really positive, right? And I think the incentivized model it works great in a lot of contexts. Like David said, I want to live in a world where people are kind of accountable for the kinds of things that they put out into the world, right? Where we buy a car, we buy certain kinds of things that are regulated by certain compliance frameworks. If there's an issue with a car, there's a lot of politics and things involved, but there are recalls when it's going to pose risk to enough people, and it's worth, in the midst of our breach fatigue from Equifax and all the Targets and Yahoos of the world, that maybe there's an incentive for doing it well that's going to be a competitive differentiator, because if there's companies that are doing that, owning that sort of thing, I would imagine that the masses are going to favor those companies and favor those products.
Yep, I believe in this. I believe that the business and the public awareness of security is the most important thing. If we don't, we can punish companies for security stuff, for violations, breaches, and all this. But until we get the word to the people who actually buy products, not much is going to change. So this is a great idea. I believe that the only way to achieve the same security in the whole world is to make sure that people understand how to differentiate the companies that invest in security and those who don't, and to prefer those that invest in security and offer similar quality products. In terms of IoT, like Rob said, there is a flex side of this. Obviously, those businesses wouldn't exist if we would punish them for stuff. But on the other hand, seeing the huge volume of devices out there that are not secured by any means, without any security attention put in them, I wouldn't cry if they went out of business, because I don't want to buy a product, or I don't want someone from my family to buy a product for childcare and then see that the vendor was hacked and all the recordings, voice recordings, audio recordings, and all stuff went public. So this is terrible, and I believe that especially IoT industry should go under serious legislation to control this, because the public masses and the society thinks only how fancy the things are and how cheap the things are. Lots of people buy stuff from AliExpress, Alibaba, all those Chinese vendors and manufacturers that don't put any attention to security. it ends up spoiling the whole society and the civilization when it comes to the security, because everything turns out to be insecure. And it doesn't only affect those people who buy the products, but let's say you buy a smart oven and put it in your home. If you are living in a building with other people, if someone hacks your oven and put it on fire, then other people may lose life, health, or they ruin flats and their apartments because of one silly person who decided to buy a cheap product from IoT vendor who didn't care about security at all. So I believe some industries should be legislated more than others, because we are not even close to the point where public and society realizes how important the security is.
And that's an amazing point, because I think that leads into the whole safety aspect of things. The pacemakers that are wireless, cars that are wireless, everything that now has internet connectivity that can be used to cause damage or take lives. It's definitely important from a legislation standpoint that way.
Absolutely, yes.
We're kind of in the midst of this discussion about legislation, and it really can go a lot of different directions. Do you guys feel like there is the right place to start? Maybe insurance. What role is insurance playing in shaping all of this culture, right? I mean, as these small, medium businesses are, purchasing their policies, whether it's for the simple fidelity policy to cover any kind of loss versus, something more specific. What role in incentivizing small, medium businesses to make better decisions will that play, and what are some pros and cons of that?
I think it's a great idea, actually, especially from an insurance perspective. If you have, if I'm a good driver and I drive a car, my premiums go down. It should be the same from a business perspective, that if I'm practicing good cybersecurity, my insurance should not be as high as somebody else that does not practice good cybersecurity.
I guess my question would be, from some of the different insurance policies and documents that I've seen out there, is do the insurance companies actually understand and stand by what they're trying to sell consumers? What standard are they going to go by as far as what good cybersecurity is? Is it following NIST? Is it following the CIS top 10? I mean, what standard is the insurance company going to support, and are they actually going to stand by the policies that they sell?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I think it'll just take a couple of claims for them to start realizing and redefining what their criteria are. But I'm also pretty sure that they would define their own criteria as well based on the insurance industry itself.
You also have to look at how are they going to assess the security of the companies that they're insuring. I mean, the amount of knowledge that you have to properly assess the security program and controls that are in place in an organization, is pretty expensive. And are they going to invest in doing that properly? It doesn't seem like something that would, apply to insurance companies that they want to have all the companies that they insure go through some kind of annual assessment to determine, some kind of score, and if they're going to incentivize them versus other companies that don't meet that criteria that they establish.
One small joke into that. Remember, Deloitte was a cybersecurity auditing firm too.
So when it comes to cyber insurances, I had some experience with this. So there are companies that buy cyber insurance thinking that it's going to cover their expenses in terms of when they get hacked, for example, which comes from the faulty assumptions that the insurance company is going to cover all the expenses related to this without really verifying the costs of the breach. So this is one thing. Lots of companies don't really realize what the insurer company is providing them and on what conditions. In terms of insuring company that's giving you insurance, they don't really verify anything. They don't come often to audit your security. They are hoping that you don't get breached, so they're not going to give you a payout. But when something happens, Okay, I guess it's my echo. So they just hope that nothing is going to happen, so they won't need to pay out anything. In terms, when something happens, they have so many exclusions in the contract that it's unlikely that you are going to get a payout, and most companies that don't realize this. And when something happens, they come to your company and then audit all your practices, compliance is there. When you're writing a contract and signing a contract with a cyber insurance company, you just promise to them that you have those certifications, compliances, that you're following those practices, but they don't really verify this. So it comes from two sides. Companies often don't realize on what type of protection they're under from insurance standpoints, and cyber insurer companies just hope mostly that the company doesn't get breached, so they won't need to put in the work to certify the breach and pay out the money. I believe this industry is fine. Some companies can do it and use it, but I don't believe most SMBs should go that way. I believe most SMBs should invest a little money for security consultants, someone who's going to jump in, create a security baseline, very basic things, and you cover them against 19% of potential security attacks, because the advanced persistent threat and all those advanced and persistent threat actors aren't going for your small business really that much if you have basic protections. There are so many businesses that have very weak and pathetic security posture that it's likely that when they see that, okay, you have strong passwords, you are covered against OWASP top 10 in your application, your infrastructure is well patched and well maintained, you're just going to jump onto other business because it's much easier to hack non-protected business than play with yours. So I would say cyber insurance is an interesting and tricky business and space to explore, but in terms of SMBs, I don't really see it's relevant that much.
Do you guys have insight into what role better awareness is going to play into all the things we've covered today?
If I was to jump into that, I would say that the only two things that, globally speaking, can help make SMBs more aware of security needs, those two things would be insurance, if they cannot get insured for whatever, if they don't do X security, or laws that require them to be compliant with X or Y. Those are the only two things that I can see that bring any kind of security awareness to SMBs.
I agree with this one. The insurance industry is just a hot topic, so a lot of SMBs learn about the value of doing security because it's a viral subject. Insurance is a viral subject, and the same with legislations. Everyone just speaks about it. Everyone is talking about this on cocktail parties, on whatnot. So it's very easy to hear about this as an SMB owner, as an exec at SMB or startup. So I don't believe that we can do much, and we can rely only on those huge tools such as legislation, compliances, and viral subjects to bring the awareness to masses.
We have just a little bit of time left. Let's talk a little bit about one of the points that someone brought up as an important point to talk about is the abundance of tools that are designed for the enterprise versus the types of tools that are really designed with intention for the small and medium business. Maybe you guys could spend just a couple of minutes each talking about that in the time that remains.
Sure. I'll go quickly here. So basically, the problem with free open source tools from just my perspective and the SME space is going to be the ability for InfoSec people, expertise, to use them. That requires time, effort, and somebody that is willing to put in that extra to implement. And not to say that there won't be InfoSec people on site, but again, I kind of go back to that mom and pop shop type deal where you could have the best open source tools available that are free, but let's say you put in your firewall and then you add an any rule, I'm pretty sure that there's no security at that point, right? But again, it's great that there's so many tools available. For example, one of the recent ones that I was playing with is IBM released their Q Radar Community Edition, which is fantastic from a powerful SIEM type tool. And PhishMe also has their, I think if it's under 500 users, they allow you to license their software, a minimal aspect of their software for free. And I'm sorry to point out a couple of these big names. I should have just anonymized as a SIM from a big vendor or whatever. But It's amazing the amount of tools out there, and yeah, you could, if you have the expertise, you could implement a almost zero cost solution other than hardware to provide yourself a really good baseline for security.
I agree with this one as well. I would go with the following advice for SMBs and startups. If you are a very small startup and SMB, let's say a couple dozen of people who don't really know anything about security, go with MSSP. Outsource your security monitoring, security improvements, hire a security consultant from once in a while to come in and advise you on stuff, but all the monitoring, incident response, outsource this. This is so hard to do. You don't want to really bother with this. You don't want to do all those things because you just can't. You're not competent enough. Most companies, very small SMB startups, should outsource security to the vendor. Which vendor choose? That's tricky. I'm preparing a paper on this, but the general rule is that go with something not really big, because in huge corporations, in huge MSSPs, they don't really care about the customer. They are happy to inject their software, do a basic monitoring, they don't really care. Security SMBs, I'm speaking of MSSPs, SMBs, startups that are focusing on MSSP on the security battlefront. There are great companies for you to choose because they will take care of you because they want the business exposure, they need the deal, so they are going to care more. They cannot afford anything else, so they are going to care about this. So I believe this is a great way to do this, to outsource to some small security company to do monitoring for you. However, when it comes to the decision, and let them choose any tool they want, whether it's a commercial tool, open source tool, it's up to them. Just have someone competent on the other side. But when you are big enough and you're facing a struggle, whether should I hire a security professional because I can afford this, or spend the same amount of money on automated tool to do something, or then outsource the security, then I would say invest all the money into competent security professional who is going to learn the context of your organization, make an impact, educate our employees, do tons of other things that regular security consultant or security professional in MSSP isn't going to do because he or she doesn't know the context of your business or your company. Having someone inside is priceless. And then support that person, even if your whole budget is a salary for that security professional, but you want to support this person, this is huge. This is great enough because that person can deploy lots of open source tools, customize them, and do the stuff and then tell you what to do next. So for small startups, very small, outsource stuff. Don't bother with this. You're not going to handle this, and it doesn't make any sense. If you are facing a discussion whether to go with security professional or MSSP, then buy an in-house person to help you with all this stuff. That's my approach, at least.
Yeah, those approaches solve a lot of things, not just the lack of fluency and awareness within organizations, but it solves limited budgets. Sometimes there aren't a difference between ops and a security team. Maybe sometimes they're the same person in certain cultures. So those are really great opinions to help.
Precisely. So
you have something to say?
Yeah, one more thing. Yeah. So
go ahead.
They've had there's a lot of companies that have lots of IT stuff, IT ops and software engineers and all those people who have the technical acumen to do stuff. You just need to hire someone, not even full time, hire someone part time, someone who's going to come to your company or deal in remotely from cheaper countries. And have that person talk to your IT ops and teach them the ropes of security, teach them the basics. That's going to be good enough. I see lots of companies failing at doing any security at all because they all believe they need to start big. They need to invest heavily in security. It doesn't need to be this way. Hire a consultant 1 hour a week, and it is going to have much bigger impact because not only that person is going to convey his own knowledge to other people, but he's going to, if you hire that person early in SDLC or early while building your company, you have a chance of not making lots of costly mistakes that you need to address in the future. So hiring anyone at any for any time, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever, for any time frame for a company, and having that person to help you with anything, which will have huge ROI in the future. You will notice and you will appreciate how great you are doing right now, just because you have this part-time person doing a little thing and supporting your existing stuff. So that will be it.
Yeah, along those lines, this is Russell. I would say that security really isn't about the products. And I know the question was about enterprise products that are designed for enterprises for security, versus the fact that there aren't a lot of security tools that are designed specifically with SMB in mind. But it's not really the products that make you secure, right? I mean, this is a topic that I tend to get on a lot in discussions with people. It's, security program is a lot more than tools. One of the joke lines is, somebody saying, how many more tools do I have to buy before I'm secure? It's not about the products. And we could talk about, enterprise-grade products that are in the Gartner Magic Quadrant versus open source tools. But, I don't think that that's really the important part. The important part is that you select the right tools for your business's needs, your environments, and you have to have someone, whether it's on staff or it's a consultant, like was suggested, even for a couple hours a week, to do the care and feeding of these tools. Without the care and feeding, you're going to end up with, the any rules, because business can't go on when things are blocked. So in order to have an environment with some security controls really in place and working, you have to have some resource, some person on staff or from another company that can make the changes that you need, because they're demanded for business to operate. So I think really it's more about that resource than about the tools. We could talk more about the tools. I'd be happy to discuss any of the particular tools that we've implemented at the SMB I work at, because when we're analyzing a new layer that we want to implement, we look at a broad spectrum of tools that other folks are using that are, very expensive licensing model, but supposedly really good, versus kind of, that one's not as good, versus ones that are open source. And ultimately, we choose the ones that meet our needs. Sometimes we have to ask for more budget. Sometimes we ask for less. But, we try to determine really what best need, will help the company. And we're fortunate to have folks on staff who can make that analysis. For most small companies who don't, I agree, you have to use a managed service provider, but optimally get somebody who can do some work a few hours a week or a month to help you maintain tools properly, and don't just have them, install them and walk away. Set it and forget it. Doesn't really work with InfoSec tools.
That's almost a perfect finishing line there, Russell. The fact that security is a process, you need a person to lead that process, so you need to create the awareness with the executives to get that person hired in any capacity to do the care and feeding of the tools and the process. That is the start, the beginning of the road for an SMB towards actual security. That's fantastic.
Well said, Klaus.
And I think we should schedule a follow-up for this, where we go into specific tools and discuss specific tools, because if there's something that SMBs need, it's as soon as they have that person who can do it, which tools for what and why.
And there are a lot of ways you can go with tools, and like I said, there are reasons why, one vendor's, endpoint protection might work better than another's. One vendor's, SOHO all-in-one network security appliance might work better than another's. Some of them, are really inexpensive if you have less than 500 nodes, 50 users, or 50 nodes, or 100 users. And there are some big name security companies who have their sort of all-in-one, network appliances that are even free for very small environments, sometimes just for home, but also sometimes for like less than 5 business users. You can use a product that's basically the same technology that larger companies are paying, an expensive licensing fee for. You can use it for free if you have under a certain number of users or workstations.
And it's important, as you said, it can't be overstated enough that a successful practice is really about people. It's about culture. The tools are, it's definitely important to choose tools, thoughtfully and intentionally, and to care for those tools and nurture those, shape those things into in ways that are going to provide the most value for each business. But it really comes down to people, a thoughtful team of people. And I'm certainly grateful for this group of thoughtful people today and answering all these questions and making this contribution. Klaus, are there any last comments we want to make?
Well, the last comment should be that for any listeners of this podcast, if you have any questions, once the podcast is on iTunes, there will be show notes where we'll put the link to the panel on PeerList where you can ask questions of any of the participants in this podcast. So it doesn't stop here. Once you listen to this, if we do follow-ups to that same thread will be there always for you to go in and interact with us who are on the podcast. Ask us questions, give us feedback, tell us we were wrong, whatever you want to do. That's it for me.
That's it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great evening or day or morning, wherever you are.
For sure. Yeah, likewise. Enjoy the rest of your time today.
Bye-bye, everyone.
All right,
Bye.
everyone.